All right, let's dive deep, shall we? Today it's all about 2 Thessalonians, a letter with some mystery and a surprisingly modern feel. You know, even though it was written centuries ago, we're going to unpack some pretty intriguing stuff today, about the end of the world even, and maybe even uncover some insights about ourselves along the way.
Yeah. It's fascinating. 2 Thessalonians was written to a community in Thessalonica. It was a bustling port city, in the Roman Empire. Imagine a vibrant hub, lots of trade going on, with ships constantly coming and going, people from all walks of life mixing and mingling. And right in the middle of it all, you have this young Christian community grappling with persecution and some pretty intense anxieties about the end of the world.
Okay, I'm trying to picture this. Ancient Thessalonica, this melting pot of cultures and ideas. And in the middle of it all, this group of early Christians trying to make sense of their faith while facing some very real dangers. Sounds a little bit like a pressure cooker. What was Paul trying to achieve with this letter?
Well, Paul had already written them one letter, First Thessalonians. But it seems like some rumors and misinterpretations were still going around, so he was writing to clarify things, especially about the end times, to offer guidance and encouragement to this community facing such hardship.
So it's like a follow-up email, addressing those reply-all blunders that can happen in any group, even in the early church. What were some of the key things he wanted to clear up?
One of the big issues was the timing and the nature of the day of the Lord, which refers to a time of judgment and reckoning. There seems to have been some confusion about whether it had already happened or was about to happen. Paul sets the record straight, explaining that it hadn't happened yet, and that certain events needed to unfold first.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting for me. Paul talks about this figure, the man of lawlessness. He sounds a lot like what we might call the Antichrist today.
Right.
This figure who will oppose and exalt himself above everything considered divine. And the day of the Lord can't happen until this guy shows up.
That's right. Paul describes this man of lawlessness as someone who will deceive people with false signs and wonders, even setting himself up in God's temple and claiming to be God.
Whoa. Okay, that's pretty intense. But Paul also mentions something holding this man of lawlessness back,
Right.
a restraining force. What's that all about?
That's one of the most debated parts of the letter. The exact nature of this restraining force is unclear, but it acts as a temporary barrier to the man of lawlessness's full manifestation.
So it's like a cosmic game of tug-of-war, with good and evil locked in this epic struggle behind the scenes. What are some of the theories about what this restraining force could be?
Some scholars believe it refers to a specific person or institution. Others think it represents a more general force, like the Holy Spirit, or the collective influence of believers. It's a bit of a mystery, but it definitely adds another layer of intrigue to this whole end times scenario.
Okay, so things are going to get pretty chaotic before the end. But what does Paul say about how we should live in light of all this? Should we just be waiting around for the world to end?
Not at all. In fact, Paul spends quite a bit of time addressing idleness in this letter. He emphasizes the importance of working diligently, not just for practical reasons, but also as a way of honoring God and contributing to the community.
So it's not just about the end of the world, but about how we live our lives right now, in the present moment.
Exactly. And that brings us to another interesting point. There's some debate about whether Paul actually wrote 2 Thessalonians. Some scholars point to stylistic and theological differences compared to his other letters.
Hold on, so are you saying Paul didn't write this at all? That changes things?
Not necessarily. It's possible that Paul wrote it later, maybe refining his views on the end times or addressing new issues that had arisen in the Thessalonian church.
So like a second edition, with some updated footnotes and clarifications. But why would Paul need to clarify things, especially about the end times?
Perhaps his earlier letter had been misinterpreted, leading to some people becoming idle and neglecting their responsibilities because they thought the end was imminent.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense. If you think the world's about to end, why bother going to work?
Right.
But Paul seems to be pushing back against that kind of thinking.
He is. He emphasizes that while we should be prepared for the Lord's return, we should also live our lives with purpose and diligence in the meantime.
So 2 Thessalonians isn't just a letter about the end of the world. It's a guide for living a meaningful life right now, even in the face of uncertainty and challenges.
Exactly. And that's what makes it so relevant for us today, even centuries later.
Right, I'm hooked. We've talked about this man of lawlessness and the restraining force. But what exactly does Paul say about how this man of lawlessness is revealed? Give me the details. What should we be watching out for?
Well, Paul describes this figure as someone who will deceive many. Through signs and wonders that serve the lie, he'll use all sorts of displays of power to mislead people and draw them away from the truth. So it's not just brute force, it's deception and manipulation that this man of lawlessness uses to gain power. That's a bit scary, especially in our world today, where misinformation spreads so easily. You see these charismatic figures all over the place, promoting their own agendas and taking advantage of people's fears and anxieties.
It's almost as if 2 Thessalonians is giving us a warning sign, flashing red lights about the dangers of blind faith and the importance of critical thinking.
Precisely. Paul was warning the Thessalonians about falling prey to those who twist the truth for their own gain. And that message is just as relevant today. Think about how easily false information spreads online, how conspiracy theories can take root and influence people's beliefs and actions.
Yeah, it makes you think about how we consume information today, doesn't it? It's a constant flood of news opinions and interpretations. It's hard to know what to trust. We need to be discerning, like those ancient Bereans, who carefully examined the scriptures to see if what they were hearing was true.
Exactly. Paul would probably be amazed by our modern world, with its instant access to information, but I think he'd also be concerned about the potential for deception and manipulation that comes with it.
So it's not just about avoiding outright lies, but also about being wary of half-truths, distortions,
Yeah.
and those who present themselves as authorities without having the substance to back it up. It's like that saying, a little knowledge can be a dangerous thing.
It is. Paul warns that those who perish do so because they refuse to love the truth, and so be saved. He even suggests that God sends a powerful delusion upon them, allowing them to believe the lie. So the responsibility falls on us to seek truth, to test what we hear, and to be open to correction.
Wow. Okay, that's heady stuff. It makes you wonder about those folks who get so caught up in conspiracy theories or extremist ideologies. Are they just gullible, or is there something more going on?
Well, that's a complex theological question. With a variety of interpretations, some see it as a form of divine judgment, while others emphasize the human responsibility to seek truth and resist deception. What's clear from 2 Thessalonians is that we have a choice to make, to embrace truth or to be swayed by falsehood.
It's a powerful reminder that our beliefs have consequences, not just for ourselves, but for the world around us.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a bit and dive into another important theme that Paul engages in 2 Thessalonians, work ethic. You mentioned earlier that he was concerned about idleness among the Thessalonians. Why do you think this was such a big deal for him?
It seems like there were some folks in the Thessalonian church who weren't pulling their weight, relying on others for their needs instead of working to support themselves. And this was creating tension and disharmony within the community.
That's right. And remember, this was a time of great uncertainty and upheaval. The early Christians were facing persecution and social marginalization. Paul may have been concerned that idleness would not only weaken the community practically, but also spiritually.
Right, because it could lead to despair, discouragement,
Yep.
and a sense of hopelessness. It's almost as if Paul is saying, don't just sit around waiting for the world to end. Get out there and make a difference. Live productive lives that honor God and contribute to the common good.
Exactly. He saw work not just as a means of providing for oneself, but as a way of participating in God's creative activity,
Yeah.
of using our talents and abilities to cultivate the world and serve others.
That's a really interesting perspective. It makes you think about the value and dignity of work, regardless of what kind of job you have.
It does, and it challenges us to find meaning and purpose in our daily work, even if it's not glamorous or prestigious.
Okay, so we've talked about the man of lawlessness, the importance of discernment, and Paul's emphasis on work ethic. What else does he touch on in this letter?
Well, one of the most striking things about 2 Thessalonians is the way Paul blends these warnings and exhortations. With words of encouragement and affirmation, he repeatedly praises the Thessalonians for their faith, love, and perseverance, reminding them that they are chosen by God and loved beyond measure.
So it's not all doom and gloom.
Not at all. In fact, you could say that the overarching tone of the letter is one of hope and encouragement. Paul wants the Thessalonians to know that even though they are facing challenges, they are not alone. They have God's presence, His power, and His promises to sustain them.
It's like a parent reassuring a child who's afraid of the dark, saying, don't worry, I'm here with you. Everything is going to be all right.
Exactly. And that's a message that can bring comfort and strength to all of us, regardless of what we may be going through.
Now, before we wrap up this part, I have to ask you about some of those verses that have become so popular throughout history. I'm always curious to hear how people have connected with these ancient words and found meaning in them.
That's a great point. 2 Thessalonians is full of verses that have resonated with believers for centuries, offering comfort, guidance, and inspiration.
Let's start with one that you mentioned earlier, 2 Thessalonians 3:3. But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one. Why do you think this verse has resonated with so many people throughout history?
I think it speaks to our deep human need for security and reassurance, especially in times of uncertainty and fear. It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that we have a source of strength and protection that is greater than ourselves.
It's like a shield against the anxieties of life, a reminder that God is always with us no matter what we face.
Exactly. And it's a promise that has been tested and proven true by countless believers throughout history.
Okay, that's a powerful one. What other verses from 2 Thessalonians have had a significant impact on people's lives?
Well, there's one that's often quoted in the context of spiritual warfare, 2 Thessalonians 3:3. But the Lord is faithful, and he will strengthen you and protect you from the evil one.
Yeah, I can see why that one would resonate. It's like a powerful affirmation of God's protection in a world that can often feel threatening and uncertain.
Exactly. It's a reminder that we're not alone in our struggles, that we have a divine ally who is fighting for us and with us.
It does bring a sense of comfort, doesn't it? Knowing that we have that kind of backing.
It does. And then there's 2 Thessalonians 2:13. But we ought always to thank God for you, brothers and sisters, loved by the Lord, because God chose you as firstfruits to be saved through the sanctifying work of the Spirit and through belief in the truth.
Okay, that one's a bit more complex. What's the sanctifying work of the Spirit all about?
Good question. Essentially, it refers to the transformative power of the Holy Spirit in our lives. It's the process of becoming more like Christ, of being set apart for God's purposes, and growing in holiness.
So it's not just about believing in God, but about allowing that belief to shape our character and our actions.
Precisely. And this verse highlights the amazing truth that God has chosen us, that we are loved and valued by him, even before we do anything to earn it.
That's a pretty amazing thought to dwell on, isn't it? That we're loved simply because we are.
It is, and it should fill us with gratitude and a desire to live our lives in a way that reflects that love.
All right, so we've got God's protection and his unconditional love. Anything else from 2 Thessalonians that's really packed a punch throughout history?
Well, how about 2 Thessalonians 1:3? We ought always to thank God for you, brothers and sisters, and rightly so, because your faith is growing more and more, and the love all of you have for one another is increasing.
That one's a beautiful reminder of the importance of community, isn't it? How we can encourage and support each other in our faith.
It is, and it highlights the fact that our spiritual growth is often intertwined with the growth of others.
It's like that saying, iron sharpens iron. We need each other to challenge us, encourage us, and help us become more like Christ.
Exactly. And of course, there's that classic benediction at the end of the letter, 2 Thessalonians 3:16. Now may the Lord of peace himself give you peace at all times and in every way. The Lord be with all of you.
That's a great one to end on. It's like a soothing balm for the soul. A reminder that even in the midst of chaos and uncertainty, we can find peace in God's presence.
Absolutely. And that peace is not just a feeling. It's a deep and abiding trust that God is in control, that he loves us, and that he will never leave us or forsake us.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive into 2 Thessalonians. We've explored its historical context, its key themes, and some of its most impactful verses. But before we wrap up, I'm curious to hear your final thoughts on the authorship debate.
Ah, yes, the mystery of who actually penned this letter. As we discussed earlier, there are some stylistic and theological variations that have led some scholars to question whether Paul was the sole author.
So what's your take on it? Do you think Paul wrote it, or was it someone else?
Well, it's a complex issue, and there's no easy answer. The evidence is somewhat ambiguous. But even if Paul didn't write every word himself, I think it's safe to say that 2 Thessalonians reflects the teachings and beliefs of the early Christian community and offers a valuable window into their understanding of the end times and the challenges they faced.
So even if there's some uncertainty about the authorship, the letter itself still has a lot to teach us.
Absolutely. And that's what's so fascinating about studying the Bible. It's a collection of ancient texts with complex histories and interpretations, but it continues to speak to us today in profound and meaningful ways.
It's like having a conversation with people from across the centuries, isn't it? Hearing their struggles, their hopes, their faith, it reminds us that we're part of something much bigger than ourselves.
It does.
Yeah.
And that's a powerful and humbling realization.
Well said. So as we wrap up this episode, what's the one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to carry with them?
I think it's the importance of living with discernment in a world that's full of distractions, deceptions, and competing voices. 2 Thessalonians challenges us to be critical thinkers, to test everything we hear against the truth of the gospel, and to seek the guidance of the Holy Spirit as we navigate the complexities of life.
Beautifully put. So, dear listeners, as you go about your week, remember the words of 2 Thessalonians. Be discerning, be faithful, be hopeful. And may the peace of Christ be with you always.